Welcome to week 2 of Surviving Your Rookie Year of Teaching. We're going to start this week with a parenting anecdote that relates to our big topic for the week. So my wife and I are trying to set some ground rules about desserts after mealtime. That's why you're here right now in my kitchen. And so our rule that we set a few months ago was that our two kids, Gabe and Lila, would only get sweet desserts on the weekends. So that means during the week, after dinner, dessert could be something like a piece of fruit, but not cookie, candy, ice cream. If they're going to get those things, they would get those on the weekend just because we're trying to promote healthy eating habits here at home. However, those expectations are constantly challenged, and during meal times in particular, we sometimes struggle to be consistent parents. And often the conversation goes something like this. So Lila says, "Dad, I finished my whole plate. I'm in the Clean Plate Club. Can I have a cookie?" "No, it's only fruit during the week." "But Dad, I finish all my vegetables too, please." Do I want to pick a fight over dessert? There's still homework, there's bedtime, and she's really been good with finishing her vegetables. "Okay, fine, just this once." I know. Bad dad. That was clearly me caving on my expectations. It was me being a weenie parent. Now that's not our term. That comes from Fred Jones, who's written a terrific book about teaching called Tools for Teaching, where he has some excellent lessons in there for teachers around consistency. And he talks about this rule called no means no. In the case that you just saw, no to Lila, all that meant was just ask me again and I'll say yes. Sometimes it can be a little bit more challenging. I hold on a little bit longer, and the challenge goes something like this. So Lila says, "Dad, I just ate 7 Brussels sprouts. Can I have a cookie now?" "No, only fruit desserts during the week." "Okay, but if I finish my plate again tomorrow, then can I have a cookie?" "Lila, a rule is a rule. I'm proud of you though." "Fine, but Dad, what if tomorrow I also clean my room?" "Cleaning your room's a chore. You gotta do it anyway." "Dad, that's not fair." "I'm sorry you feel that way, but that's final." "Okay, fine, but what about dessert after lunch?" "Listen, we'll talk about lunch tomorrow." So what did Lila just learn in this situation? Well, she learned that my expectations were subject to negotiation. She learned that if she would just keep the conversation going long enough, that ultimately my no could turn into a maybe or even a yes. Well, Fred Jones has a rule about this as well. He talks about it as that I'm not going to stand here and listen to your yammering rule. Meaning I'm not going to allow for protracted conversations about an expectation that really should be clear to students. So what does this look like in the classroom? You have any number of expectations that get challenged all the time by students. Maybe it's you have to raise your hand if you want to use the bathroom, or the class starts when the bell rings and you need to be sitting in your seat working, or you need to be 100% silent during independent reading time. If you have expectations like that, there's no question that students will challenge them in any number of different ways. And then the question is, are you consistent or not? And Fred Jones says this is a binary question. There's no such thing as being a little bit consistent or sort of consistent or consistent some of the time. You're either inconsistent or you're consistent in how you uphold those expectations. So now let's take a look at what this looks like in the classroom. In a minute, you're going to watch a short video of a classroom discussion, and I want you to pay particular attention to how consistently the teacher enforces her expectation around student-to-student tracking. By tracking, we mean how students are paying attention to each other during the discussion. So at minimum, it means students not writing or doing any other work while their classmates are speaking, and some teachers actually even ask that students turn their bodies to face the person who's giving an answer in class during a discussion. So let's take a look at how consistent the teacher is at enforcing her expectations around tracking.
So it should have 5 little ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3x plus 2x. Thank you, Delvanti, for tracking. Minus 3. You can't combine. Can you combine this 5 with this x?
No.
No, because they are not alike.
Oh, this is alike because 5.
Which ones can we combine? 2?
Combine.
Excellent. But don't leave out the fact that you're dealing with x's. You can combine the 3x and the 2x. So what do you get if you combine them, Delvanti? You get? If you combine, I'm going to ask again, the 3x and the 2x, what do you get? You get 5x. Good. So you get 5x. And what can we do about these? When we combine them, what do you know? Deja? Okay, I'm going to wait because none of these students over here are tracking. So say it again louder, please. Tracker, please.
Since we have 3 negatives and
Again, you got Kasim. You need to be tracking. Say it again, please.
we have a negative and a positive, it equals 0. So 3 of them negatives plus 3 of them positives will equal 0. So you have 2 positives left.
Good. So I know that with this one and this.
So let's take a few minutes here to analyze how consistently this teacher enforced her expectations that students track each other during a classroom discussion. We ask ourselves 3 questions. First, did she make that expectation clear to students? And I think the answer here is yes. She reset her expectations at one point. She shouted out students who were following her expectations. So pretty safe to say students knew they were supposed to be tracking each other during this discussion. Second, did she notice when they weren't meeting the expectations? I think the answer is no here. We saw a couple of girls having a very obvious conversation. It was on the bottom right-hand part of your screen. There was also that one young man who fell asleep while tracking, and the teacher didn't notice any of those behaviors. The third thing we ask is, did she have a consistent response to students who didn't meet the expectation? And again, the answer is no here. Her responses to these different situations seem to vary. Fred Jones would say that this teacher is really setting herself up for some problems down the road. Her inconsistencies are essentially teaching students that her expectations don't really matter, that they're up for negotiation. So why is it especially important to be consistent in how you enforce behavioral expectations? Well, that's because underneath all of your behavioral expectations are your goals about student learning. You don't just create behavioral expectations just to exert power over students, just to try to get them to comply with your directions. Instead, every good behavioral expectation is somehow linked to students being able to learn more in your class. So the teacher who we just observed, her expectation around student-to-student tracking was entirely in service of students being able to listen and learn from each other. So why is it so hard to be consistent even when we know how important it is to consistently enforce our behavioral expectations? Well, we came up with 4 reasons. Number 1, you might not have that automatic PIPO yet. That means that you might not notice when students aren't meeting your expectations because you're spending so much time thinking about your lesson. And that's very common for rookie teachers the first time they're moving through their curriculum. Number 2, you might just be scared of the conflict with the students. When they're not meeting your expectations, you have to confront that behavior, and that invites some amount of conflict, and none of us really like to deal with that. That's not why we got into teaching. Number 3, you might start to second guess whether your expectations were truly clear, right? You might look at the class and say, maybe this one's on me. My rules weren't clear enough, so that causes you to not be consistent in enforcing an expectation. And then 4th, a lot of times you think, I want to keep the momentum of my lesson going. So you're saying, I'm picking and choosing my battles. I'm not going to correct a student in this case because I think it'll disrupt the flow of my lesson. So those are 4 very powerful and valid reasons why teachers aren't consistent. Now let's be clear about something. Our goal here is not to turn you into a teacher robot that notices and responds to every student misbehavior exactly the same way every time. We think that's probably impossible. And in fact, when you walk into a veteran teacher's class, you'll notice that they're exercising lots of judgment in these different situations, and it doesn't even look like veterans are responding consistently to student behavior. But we think that if your class right now looks anything like mine did when I was a rookie teacher, you still have a long way to go in terms of being more consistent, and we can get started on that work right now. Now, what does it take to be a consistent teacher? 4 things. First, you need to have a vision for what you want your classroom to look like. At any given moment of the lesson, you need to know exactly how the class should look, what students are doing, what you're doing. Second, you need to be able to state really clear expectations that align with that vision, and you need to be able to justify for students why you had those expectations in the first place, how they support their learning. Third, you need constant proactive reminders to students while you're trying to help them internalize that vision and those expectations. And fourth, you need a way of responding automatically to students when they don't meet those expectations, to the extent that you've developed judgment for handling those different situations. Okay, back to the teacher brain. Remember the PIBO, and that the goal is to make your PIBO automatic and consistent in how it responds to student misbehaviors. Well, there are two ways that you can do that. One is you can do it over time, through trial and error, through experience. You can become more consistent in how your PIBO picks up on these things in the classroom. But we're not interested in that. We want you to get better right now. So the second way you can develop that automatic PIBO is through practice, through planning for these situations and actually practicing them. We're about to meet a couple of teachers. Through this type of intentional effort, they were able to go from being inconsistent to consistent, and it had a profound effect on the overall culture of their classrooms.